All right, guys. Are there any questions over any of the assignments so far? Now, what we're looking at today is the zero product property. Now, whenever we have a polynomial where the left side or one of the sides is ax squared plus bx plus c and it's equal to 0, then we can use the zero product property to solve. And really what the zero product property is talking about, if we have two things, so being multiplied together. So a times b is equal to 0. Well, anytime we have two things multiplied together equal 0, one of them must be what? 0. Because the only way that we can multiply two things together and get 0 is if one of these is 0. That's the only way that this is going to work. And that's what the zero product property is stating. If two expressions or two things multiplied together equals 0, then one of them must be 0. So when we look at this first example here, we have two things multiplied together that equal 0. K plus 1 times k minus 5 is 0. So one of these two must be 0. So according to the zero product property, we're saying that k plus 1 is going to need to equal 0, or k minus 5 is going to need to equal 0. One of these two needs to equal 0. And now we just need to solve. So if we're solving for k plus 1, what do we need to do to both sides? We need to subtract 1, which is going to tell us k is equal to -1. Now for the other one, for k minus 5 is equal to 0, we'll need to add 5 to both sides, which will tell us k is equal to 5. Questions on any of this here? Yeah. Because if we wanted to check it, we could. We could plug -1 back in for k, saying -1 plus 1 times -1 minus 5, because this here needs to equal 0. Well, -1 plus 1 is 0. -1 minus 5 is -6. And 0 times -6 is 0. We can do the same thing with 5. We can say 5 plus 1 times 5 minus 5. Well, 5 plus 1 is 6. And 5 minus 5 is? So we get 0. Questions on any of this here? Let's look at the next one. And for this one here, we do have two things that are multiplied together equal 0, so one of them must be 0. So we're saying that 2m plus 3 is equal to 0, or 4m plus 3 is equal to 0. One of these two must be equal to 0. And we solve. So for the first one here, we can subtract 3 from both sides, which will tell us that 2m is equal to -3. Then we divide both sides by 2, which tells us m is equal to -3/2. Then we can do a similar thing for the other side. And the first thing we can do is subtract 3 from both sides, which will tell us that 4m is equal to -3. Then we would divide by 4, which tells us m is equal to -3/4. But -3/4 will make this equation be 0. So our two answers for this here are -3/2 and -3/4. Any questions on any of this here? We ready? It's finding 0, yes, and using the zero product property. So when we look at this next one here, do we have two things multiplied together? No. But what we've been going over the last few days is factoring, which will let me be able to rewrite this as two parentheses being multiplied together. And whenever we do this, we do need to make sure it's equal to 0, which is true, it is. So we can go on to factoring. And our first step in factoring is looking for a greatest common factor, something that will go into all three terms. But we don't have one. So we'll rewrite it as two sets of parentheses with three spaces. Our third step is to find the sign. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term, which is plus. So we have plus and plus. If the third term was negative, our signs are opposite. So now we need to find the factors of the first and third term. Our factors of x squared are x and x. And the factors of 21. One and 21 and 3 and 7. Which one do we want to try first? And then we can check this here. Now we don't multiply, or we don't have to multiply x and x, because we know that'll give us x squared, because that's where we got it, the factors from x squared. And we don't have to check 3 and 7, because we know 3 times 7 is going to give us 21, because that's where we got it from. Now for this here, we still have a few more steps to work, yes? Because we'll still be working underneath it. So when we check this, we don't want to write it underneath the problem. We can write it off to the side. Now x times 7 is 7x. Plus 3x is equal to 10x, which is the middle number. So it tells us that these are the correct factors. But again, we have two things multiplied together that equal 0, so one of them must be 0. So x plus 3 is equal to 0, or x plus 7 is equal to 0. And now we solve. Bless you. So for this here, we can subtract 3 from both sides, telling us x is equal to -3. And for the other one, we're going to subtract 7 from both sides, telling us x is equal to -7. And that's it. Now at this point here, we could plug them back in to make sure that they work, but these two here are our answers. And if we were asked to check, all we would need to do is plug the value of, say, -3 back in for x. And see if this equals 0. Because if it does, then we do have the correct answer. So we could say -3 squared plus 10 times -3 plus, and we get 0. We can do the same thing with -7 squared plus 10 times -7 plus, and we do indeed get 0 for both cases. So when we check it, we can say, okay, this is 0 is equal to 0. It works. We can say the same thing for -7. Both of them work, so they are both our answer. Any other questions on this here? Let's look at the next one. 4x squared plus 20x minus 24. So is it equal to 0? Is there a greatest common factor? It is 4. So we can factor the 4 out. If we factor 4 out of 4x squared, we divide it. We get x squared. 4 divided by by 20x, we get minus 6. Because we won't have x with 6 because there's not one to begin with. Now we can do our two sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Because that's our second step with factoring. Our third step is to find the sign. Yes. If the third term is positive, the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. So one's going to be positive, one is negative. That brings us to step number 4, finding the factors of the first and third term. Well, the factors of the first term, x squared, are x and x. The third term is our 6. So we can have 1 and 6 or. So which one do we want to try first? We do 2 and 3 first. And if we check this, x times negative 3 is negative 3x. 2 times x is going to be plus 2x. Which gives us a negative x. Is that what we wanted? But switching, because flipping the signs would change it from negative x to positive x. Would flipping 2 and 3 change anything? No, it's just going to change it from negative x to positive x. So we'll need 1 and 6. Where do we want to put the 6? So why would we want to put it on the positive side and not the negative? We want the middle term to be positive, so most likely we want the bigger number to be positive, yes? And we can check it and see. X times negative 1 is negative x. 6 times x is going to be plus, which gives us a positive 5x. So that's what we wanted, yes? So now we can solve because we do have 2 or more things multiplied together to equal 0, yes? Can we do anything with this 4? Is there any way I can plug a number in and change it from 4? No, there's no variable there, yes? So does it matter with multiplying together equals 0? No. Because the only ones that we can change are the x plus 6 and the x minus 1. These are the only 2 we can actually plug a value in. Now, if it had been 4x out front, then we could actually do something with it. But since it's just 4, we're not going to do anything with it. Now, for the x plus 6, we can subtract 6, telling us x is equal to negative 6. For x minus 1 is equal to 0, we can add 1 to each side, telling us x is equal to negative 6 and 1 are our 2 answers. Any questions on this here? Let's look at this one next, because this one looks a little different, doesn't it? What's different about this one? It doesn't have a middle term. There's still a middle term, but what's its value? 0. Because if it's not there, it's understood to be 0. And we can still factor it the exact same way we've been doing the rest. It follows the same steps. So is there a greatest common factor? 3. So we can factor 3 out. And if I factor the 3 out of 3n squared, we get minus. Yeah, we can factor the 3 out of 75. Anything's to this. Yep. Or you can think of them as quarters. Now, we can do our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Now for this here, the third term, well, the negative 25 is still the third term because our second term is, now since the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. Whenever the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. Now the factors of the first term, factors of n squared are n and n. Now the factors of 25, which one do we want to try first? 5 and 5. And if we check this, n times negative 5 is negative 5. 5 times n is positive. And what's negative n? 5n. Yep. Negative 5n plus 5n is. Does that match up with our middle term? Because we don't have one, so it should be 0. Which means we can say that n plus 5 is equal to 0 or n minus 5. To solve this here, we would subtract 5 from both sides, telling us n is equal to negative 5. For the other one here, we would add 5 to both sides. So n is equal to 5. So n is equal to positive and negative 5. Questions on any of this here? Do we feel pretty comfortable with these here? Okay. Let's look at this one. Let's look at number 8. What makes 8 different? It equals negative 9. What did we need these equal to? So how can I make this equal to 0? Yeah, we can just add 9p to both sides. Because negative 9p plus 9p is 0. On the other side, we'll have 3p squared plus 9p minus 120. Because the p squared and p are not the same thing. They're not like terms, so we can't combine them. Now, it does have a greatest common factor of 3 that we can factor out, which leaves us with p squared plus 3p minus 40. Now we can do our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Since the 40 is negative, our signs are opposite. Because if the 40 had been positive, the signs are going to be the same and match the sign of the middle term. Because if the third term is positive, the signs are the same and they match the sign of the middle term. If the third term is negative, the signs are opposite. So here they're going to be opposite. Now we need to find the factors of the first and third term. Well, the factors of p squared are p and. Now we need to look at the factors of 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 3, 4 and 10. 3 doesn't work. 5 and 8. Does 6 work? No. 6 is only divisible with both 2 and 3 are. And really, the only next one that works is 8, but we already have it. So looking at all these here, which one do we want to try first? 5 and 8, which one's positive? 8 and 5. And we can check this here. P times 5, negative 5 is negative 5p. 8 times p is going to be positive 8p. And negative 5p plus 8p is positive 3p. So these are the correct terms because that does give us our correct middle term. Now we can set it equal to 0. So we can set p plus 8 is equal to 0 and p minus 5 is equal to 0. Then we need to solve for the value of p, so we can subtract 8. So p is equal to negative 8. Yes. Over here we can add 5. And that's it. Questions on any of this here? Let's look at one last one and then we'll be done for today. So let's do 10. Now there's 2 ways we can get this equal to 0. One of them is that we can subtract the 14n and 21. We can move those over to the other side. Yeah, we can subtract 7n squared from both sides. That works too. And that'll tell us that 0 is equal to negative 7n squared plus 14n plus 21. Seven, yes. I would take the negative with it, because I try to keep the number in front of that squared term, the biggest power, positive if I can. Because if we factor negative 7 out of negative 7n squared, we get n squared. Now, if we factor a negative out of positive 14, it's going to make it negative. And 14 divided by 2, 7 is 2. N. The 21 is going to go from positive 2, and 21 divided by 7 is 3. So when we do that, it's helping us keep step 3 working the way it should. It helps us with that. Because now we can do step 2, which is our 2 sets of parentheses with 3 spaces. Since the third term is negative, our signs are opposite. One is going to be positive and one is negative. Now the factors of the first and third term, factors of n squared are n and n. Now the factors of 3 are 1 and 3. 1 to be positive and 3 negative. Well, we're doing that because the middle term is what? Negative. So we're hoping that if we make the bigger number negative, the middle term will be negative when we check it. So we distribute here. N times negative 3 is negative 3n. And then we have 1 times n is going to be a positive n. And negative 3n plus n is negative 2n, which is the middle term that we wanted because we needed to match it up with negative 2n. And last but not least, we do have 2 things that multiply together equals 0, so one of them must be. So we can say that n plus 1 is equal to 0, and n minus 3 is 0. For the first one, we can subtract 1 from both sides, telling us n is equal to negative 1. For the other one, we can add 3 to both sides, telling us n is equal to 3. So these here are our 2 answers. Any questions on any of this here? And that's it. So your homework is going to be a worksheet.